That's right. I have wrestled with an alligator. I done tussled with a whale. I done handcuffed lightning, throw thunder in jail.
You can't stop me.
I'm going to win.
It ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward.
I won't quit.
I just keep getting stronger.
Stronger?
Stronger.
Hey everybody, welcome to Barbell Me Search. We kind of got a special episode because I won't talk about the before stuff. We can kind of get into that after, but we have Jeb here. Jeb, this would be your second podcast we have with you as a co-host. So say hello.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah, it's super awkward. We got Christian Thibaudeau and Joel Seedman. And this one will be a fun one because we're going to talk about ideas and research and interpretation of research and half squats. And I think like the intro of this, if you get mad just by hearing that, I think like you should listen to this so that like you share it and share the hate, because then at least we'll get more views. But just understand that like I'm not here and Jeb and I aren't here to like talk shit about anything. We're just here to talk about ideas and interpretation of this stuff, because I think that that's something that's missed. And I think like cordial interaction on the internet seems to be lost nowadays. And the reason why I brought you two on is because Joel put something on the internet, everyone got mad. That just is like synopsis. And Christian shared his response, and it was like a very good response. And then Joel said, hey, very good response. And that's exactly the opposite of what happened with everyone else. So I was like, yeah, let's bring these two on. So everyone, welcome Christian and Joel. But Christian, if you haven't heard Christian, can you kind of give yourself an intro, and then we'll go to Joel?
That's like the part I really hate. First, because as you know, until my adrenaline is high, I sound like a fifth grader or something like that, with a terrible accent on top of it.
We covered
it takes me like 5 minutes to get going. So it's always awkward to talk about myself. So instead of talking about myself, I want to talk about the haters. And I think that
go ahead.
It's going to get me amped up, so it's going to be a better start. I didn't have my caffeine this morning because I was practicing golf. It would get me all tight and stuff, right? So, and I think that in this current situation, like with the lockdown and stuff like that, it just makes matter worse with the haters, because the drive for what I would call hating and competitive behavior, like these people, the haters, actually makes themselves in competition with a coach they hate, probably because they're jealous of their status or whatever, right? They have that competitive juice to prove them wrong. And that aggressivity, it all comes from adrenaline, right? It's the adrenergic system. And what triggers adrenaline? It's cortisol. So now everybody's stressed out because of the situation. Everybody is in lockdown. Now everybody hates each other at home, for example. And that stress response increases adrenaline, which makes everybody aggressive and seeking conflict. So that's my introduction. I'm Christian Thibaudeau. I'm a strength coach I've been a strength coach for like 23 years, training pro athletes, Olympians, also having been a personal trainer. I had the exact opposite progression as most strength coaches. I actually started out as a strength coach. I was 19 when I first started training pro athletes, and eventually actually moved into personal training when I moved back to Canada to get married. I was in a super small town, so then I started working with body composition clients as well as bodybuilders, stuff like that.
Yeah, and now you're an avid golfer. Like you're back to
I used to be a golfer, man. I competed the provincial championship, and I used to practice 6 to 8 hours a day. That's what I really love doing. And so I actually have to force myself to keep lifting because I'm starting to really look like a golfer.
Well, the funny thing is, and like Jeb, you can jump in whenever too, is just that Christian knows he's on video, so he has his transformer bar in the background. So anyone's not seeing this on YouTube, it's like I lift, just so you know, it's right here.
Yeah, I haven't squatted like in 20 years. That's just like loaded for show. Actually did half squats yesterday and power snatches. So there you go. The two most specific lift for golfing performance.
I like how you prefaced it by like calling the haters what they are based on your interpretation, and they're gonna like not be okay with that. So yeah, Joel, introduce yourself and like we'll kind of get this started. And,
So I guess real quick though, Christian, the way you pointed out, everybody's cortisol levels are so high from all this. So I guess I'm contributing to everyone being in a catabolic state and losing muscle. So all the haters out there, if they start feeling extra weak, I guess you can throw that extra hate back on me. So, you know.
Yeah, but I'm gonna sell more programs because they're losing the size, man. So
we'll talk about that too, actually, because I think that's a good point. Afterwards. But it's just like, yeah, I don't know, Joel. So it's also put this out there for anyone listening. Joel said you can direct all the hate to him. So if you hate any of us, Joel said he'd take it all on, and even Christian's like neurotyping hate, put it on Joel. Anyway,
I'm used to it by now. So no, yeah, actually. As far as my background goes, I've been training and doing strength coaching for about 16 years now. Actually, about 17, because I started when I'm 18. I'm about 35 now. But my background is I did my undergrad and master's in kinesiology. And then I did my PhD and doctoral in kinesiology as well. So this basically has allowed me to take what I learned in school, take the science component and basically apply it to the athletes and the clients that I train. So it's been a good ride, but as you guys have pointed out, it definitely, for whatever reason, some of my methods tend to produce a lot of controversy and a lot of hate. I don't actually create or promote my methods for the purpose of trying to get people to, you know, start all these controversies and you know, different hate forms, whatever, about me. I don't look for that attention. I just kind of have a different approach to my training and some of the research that I've looked at, and obviously we're going to talk about that, but it definitely incites a lot of anger.
Let's start there, because I think we can kind of go back and forth this. And again, Jeb, when you have a question, I just kind of have this in the top of my head. It's that kind of the point of a lot of this stuff as we're starting the new iteration of the podcast is that there's a lot of strength professionals with their masters and maybe with their PhDs, or they just have training experience like me. And it's I think there's a fear around creating new ideas because of the hate. And it's not like, let's just say the hate is whatever, like you can be on whatever side, but like, I want to understand where you guys are coming from in terms of how do you create content and how do you interpret the research and your observations that come to this conclusion, and then be confident enough to put it out in the world. Because I think that squashing that ends up squashing the progress that could inevitably be something better. So that's just the preface, what we're going off of. But how did you start creating your own ideas? Like, even if it goes all the way back to school, like where does that journey start for you, Joel?
Like where does your model kind of derive?
First, I want to address what Dean just said, because it's actually like, I'm kind of surprised. It's super smart. And
that is odd.
we know. That's why we did it.
Yeah, it's a Canadian thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm me personally, and I'm actually going to answer the question. My biggest influence was always how people train like 100 years ago. Like the strongman of the late 1800s, early 1900s, the early like founders of strength training, up to like probably Paul Anderson and Bob People. And I think the main reason is that because there was no social media, there was not even like normal media in training back then. So you didn't actually put your ideas out there. You would train by yourself, maybe with your group of friends in your gym, whatever, but you certainly would not put your ideas for everybody else to see. Not because you didn't want to, because there was no mean to do so. And because of that, people, I think, were not afraid of trying unconventional ideas, trying new things that might actually look stupid. I mean, Bob Peoples and Paul Anderson both would dig a hole on the ground and put a deadlift bar over it and gradually put some hurt back in the hole to increase the range of motion every week. I mean, how stupid would that look? But it was super effective. So I think that these guys came up with much better ideas than what we had in the late 1990s up to like maybe 10 years ago. Because people are afraid to try new ideas. They were not, because nobody would judge them. So I think that me personally, my biggest influences all come from guys of this era. And to me, where I'm like slightly different than Joel, I think, because we see eye to eye on many things in our use of different contraction types. I mean, we both emphasize eccentrics, isometrics. We use band to change the strength curve, stuff like that. I stick more with my more common basic movements, mostly because it is my own personal preference as an athlete. So I believe that you should teach what you're good at. And I'm not good at unilateral stuff. I'm not good at highly coordinated movement. I've never done that. I'm an Olympic weightlifter by trade. So I stick to the big basic, but I still want methods. I still want to play with contraction types. So that's where I'm coming from mostly. It's changing, like using various ranges of motion, overloading certain part of the movement, using isometrics, eccentrics, which are a big part of my training. I've been for at least 20 years. So
which is cool, because I think like I said, that's going to differ from Joel just because of Joel's route through education. So maybe I'm assuming something. So Joel, kind of where does your, I guess, model, like Jeb say, start?
That was a good article you put out today, by the way, Christian, with the CrossFit and, talking about how one of the missing components is like the eccentrics and the isometrics. I thought that was a very good point. I think that it actually that could be a topic we discussed. But I think for me personally, my journey was, I kind of started about 18 is when I started training. That's when I started, going to kinesiology school. And I was very by the books. It was all about, hey, let me look at the books. Let me examine the literature and let me follow it as closely as possible. Let me see what all the experts are doing. Let me see what all the, everyone is applying in the field, and let me try to replicate that as perfectly as I could. So that was kind of my first, 6 or 7 years in the field up until I was about 24. I kept noticing that I myself and clients, because I was training pretty much nonstop from the time I've been 18, that there were some trends in some of the things that I was seeing, whether it was, maybe not the results that I was hoping for, maybe it was some different things with pain and inflammation and joint issues. And this was something that, for me personally, I struggled with a lot. For whatever reason, by the time I was kind of in my early/mid-20s, my body really started to break down, and it forced me to kind of rethink what I was doing. I was an ass to grass squatter. This is, kind of when I put up that post that generated so much heat, that's what I was trying to essentially reiterate, was that I used to squat ass to grass, okay? And for whatever reason, and I had a pretty good ass to grass squat. Again, a lot of the haters go, "Oh, your ass to grass squat." What's that?
Mechanics were solid. I mean, it wasn't a form.
Yeah, no, they were. I used to have people come up to me all the time, tell, "Oh my gosh, you have such a great squat." Now, it wasn't necessarily ass to grass, but it was essentially in a barefoot shoe. If I was wearing a heel shoe, I think I would have been able to go deeper. But the point is that it did not agree with my body. I got to the point where I could only squat and deadlift like once every 2 weeks because I was in so much pain, just a lot of inflammation as a result. I could tell my cortisol levels were elevated. I was holding a lot more body fat. My strength in general started to drop, my movement efficiency. And that was just one example. I go back to the overhead press, the bench press, all these different examples. But the point is, I realized there were some gaps there, and I kind of was forced to rethink everything that I had been taught. And I saw some similar trends in my clients, and it wasn't because I was a bad trainer. I don't consider myself an amazing trainer, but I was definitely not a bad trainer even back then. So I was applying the methods, what I think was pretty solid. So that's why I did my PhD, was to kind of say, hey, let me take a step back here. Let me wipe the slate clean. Let me kind of essentially forget or put on the side everything that I've learned and look at the science. Let's look at the research and see what I come up with. And basically that's what I've tried to do for the past 7 or 8 years, is basically look at the science and kind of develop my own training protocols from that, rather than saying, hey, here's what everyone's been doing, so here's what I'm doing.
Well, and this might be something Jeb might echo. And Christian, I know you go into the research too. I think that like a lot of professionals on our level, and I'm using you, Christian, but that are trainers and have been trainers for like so long and maybe don't have our PhDs, it's almost like a scary thing to go into research. And maybe we'll start off with Christian here, because it's kind of more similar to our perspective as people are trying to create these ideas with this research. How did you start getting into the research, and how did you go about interpreting it and then mixing it with your observational stuff? Like, what did that journey look like for you? Because you reference research all the time.
Yeah. Well, I think that first we need to understand that most people use research completely the wrong way. Okay, most people, and especially the haters, right? What they will do, they will look for research that backs their opinion. Their opinion will not change. They have already decided what they will believe in, regardless of their findings. So they will look at maybe like 20 different studies. And of course, they don't read the article. They don't read the actual study. They don't read the methodology. They just read the conclusions. Especially, most of the time, they will only read the abstract. And they will only look at the study that proves their point. And I'm actually, I was for a long time guilty of that. In fact, the first time I contacted Joel about like half squats was after I read a study showing that in some regard, like the full squats were better in that case for developing the glutes and stuff like that. So I thought, well, you know, full squats are superior. And doing so, I actually didn't look at or didn't include or didn't believe the study showing that, you know what, the difference is pretty much insignificant. And in fact, in many regards, the half squat or partial squats are superior in the case of increasing vertical jump, increasing sprinting speed. So I think that the one thing that I would recommend is you should never dismiss research that goes against what you believe in. You should not get into research with a preconceived idea and looking at the research just to prove what you believe in. I mean, you might go in reading research with an hypothesis. Okay, I believe that eccentric action, emphasizing the eccentric, a slow eccentric, for example, will be beneficial for improving techniques. Because it's pretty obvious to conclude that, you know what, going slow on purpose during the eccentric and including isometric pauses will make it easier to improve technique. So I can actually look at at research. Are there any information showing that accentuating the eccentric might have a different impact on motor learning? And there is. I mean, there's a study showing, for example, that there's a greater motor cortex activation during an eccentric action, which helps you learn the movement and program the movement better. And of course, if going slower, well, it's easier to use good mechanics. Same thing with isometrics. I mean, personally, I've been using isometrics for as long as I can remember, like adding pauses during the lift, like Joel's eccentric isometrics, is something I've been using quite a bit of, and also multi-pauses. And I always felt that, you know what, it makes my form more solid. And when you look at the research, recent studies have shown that during an isometric hold, you are recruiting the antagonist, the synergist muscle, and the agonist more so to create active stability. And the more active stability you have, the stronger you can be because your body feels protected. So it's a case of I have an hypothesis, but if the research would have shown that I'm wrong, I would not have discounted that research. So I think that the big thing that people need to do is be objective when you look at research. Don't have a closed mind. I mean, I've changed my mind like many times based on the research and actual experience. So that's
and then do you also feel though you have to approach the research? Because I know part of the discussion you guys had is about particularly methodology. We know we're talking about methodology, looking at a study that maybe disproves your hypothesis, but also looking and saying, hey, the methodology of this study might not have been up to par with what I see. So therefore, and again, I think that comes back into the idea of not just reading abstracts, right? Yes. And so when you're looking at that, what standards do you apply to how you would apply it to your own hypothesis? And Joel, I think this is a great point here because so much of your article dealt a lot with that.
Yeah, I was going to say, so this is like, also, if you're listening to this and you're like, fuck Joel and fuck Christian, no one read Joel's article. No one, what?
I'm going to add something afterwards, though.
I was going to say, no one read Joel's article where he like had like 5 paragraphs about how that exact thing. About how I have studies that like don't agree with me and I don't agree with them because of this. Anyways, what would you have, Christian? Because we're gonna go Joel too.
Well, it's just about the haters again.
Okay, let's go there, and then we can get. I think it's good.
It's just a matter. It's really a matter. I think that of like I like that guy. I don't like that guy. I mean, if you hate Donald Trump, I mean, he could save the world, and he's still gonna be an asshole.
Christian. You know that's the best. We're not talking Trump in here.
It's an example. Okay, I'm going to say about Trudeau, right? You can hate Trudeau, but if he saves the world, then he's still an asshole, right? But if you don't like a coach because he might have said like one thing that ruffled your feathers, then even if the stuff he says it makes sense, you will always disregard it. For example, okay, me or Joel mostly Joel, because I'm a likable guy. That's just why I'm that awesome. He will like put out a method that people say, oh, that's completely out there. That's crazy. But you know, if Louis Simmons does something, oh, that's fucking awesome, right? I mean, the Westside guys, they never deadlift from the floor.
Okay, no, hold this thought, because we're gonna go into
the go there.
We're already gonna talk Westside, because I think that you both agree on. But anyways, I'm squashing this because that's a good conversation.
It's your show.
Trust me.
I was getting excited to hear that. Hold on a minute.
No, we got to hold it for like when we have a structured squat conversation, because I think that I know exactly what Christian's going to say.
All
That it'll be better to unleash it afterwards.
All right.
But what did you think about what Jeb said? And you can even touch on that with like, how did you start to interpret things?
Yeah, I think Christian, that was a great point, where you said that, you know, you can't have a preconceived agenda, or even you can have a little bit of a preconceived idea and hypothesis, which is totally fine. I think that's actually kind of part of research, is that you have a hypothesis and you want to see if it's true or not. But if you get so invested into it, and then it just becomes like, oh, I have to prove this right. It's like, no, I want to see what the true answer is. And you got to get to the point where like, hey, I don't care what the answer is. I don't care if it says that everything that I'm doing, everything that I've been promoting, everything I've been advocating for is false. If it is, so be it. That's what I want to find out. So yeah, I think the research is an interesting one, because really, if we wanted to, we could get into a battle all day about the different sides of the research, and I could give my side, and so could give their side, and we could have you know, a good amount of research supporting ass to grass. We could have a good amount of research supporting quarter squats. We could have a good amount of research supporting, you know, 90-degree squats. It's really, that's why I always say, at some point you have to kind of look at the research more in a rational, logical perspective. You have to dissect it a little bit more, like Christian said. You just can't read the conclusion. But even after all that, let's say you have some good studies in all the areas. Let's say you have studies that show high level of evidence, which is actually very rare, which we can talk about. But if it shows, all of them show a high level of evidence, and we have evidence for all of them, you eventually have to say, okay, well, if there's evidence for all these, and these studies show that this is best, and so on and so forth, we then have to look at the foundational principles of movement. You have to look at the biomechanics. We have to look at neurophysiology. We have to look at, you know, structural, musculoskeletal physiology, and kind of go back and say, hey, what are some of the foundational principles that we've learned early on that we know are pretty true, and how does this line up, and what part of the research kind of supports this, and if it doesn't, why is that happening? And then we can say, I wonder if there are some flaws in the study. Perhaps they were not implementing it right. And I always say this about the research, and this is the unfortunate thing about the research in kinesiology, is that the quality that it's implemented in, not the quality of how the statistics are done and how they're analyzed and how it's, you know, the research methods themselves, but how are the training protocols implemented? Do they have a good strength coach there explaining how to do, you know, the squat properly, how, you know, the tempo, do they really reinforce it? 99% of the time, unfortunately, a lot of the protocols are implemented pretty haphazardly, and it's very low quality. So it can be a little tricky to take away and extrapolate, well, here's what this research study shows, and we know this is right, because it's like, well, how did they implement it? If we took a video of them actually, you know, training the participants and having them go through it, I think we would all be a little bit surprised, because I've been part of these studies. I've witnessed some of these studies. I've observed a lot of them. I've talked to other strength coaches and researchers who have witnessed studies in strength and conditioning, and it's kind of mind-boggling how little quality control is involved in the implementation of the strength protocol.
And I think it's hard to, like, I was part of one with Ben House in Costa Rica, but long story short is that process alone made me realize how hard it is to control those variables. It's not a knock at like the people doing the research. It's just like, that costs a lot of money, it costs a lot of time, it costs a lot of competence in terms of all that coaching stuff. And it's just like, that's the reality of it. And I guess, what would you say to the people who are saying that that's a cop-out to like their bias or their research? Because I think that is the main argument that always comes up. It's like, well, you can't just knock that because it's science. But I think anyone who's been a part of it does knock it. So I just want to kind of get your take on that, because you probably have been part of a lot.
Yeah. I think if you rationally analyze things and logically look at it and don't just take it at face value, I think you have to admit it. There's no way you can say that, these researchers know how to truly train the participants and give them the proper protocols. And even if they did, like you said, when you have a large group of participants coming in and you're crunched for time and you got to, get all these different subjects going through the different protocols, it's rushed. It really is. So the quality goes down the drains. I know when I train, a large group of athletes compared to training someone one-on-one, I know the quality suffers. It's just inevitable. It's how it is. Let alone having a group of researchers who really don't know what they're doing when it comes to, coaching. And oftentimes they're taking fairly untrained or completely untrained or participants that have just been strength training, at the university setting, not even in athletics. It just makes for a very poor level of quality control. And that's where, you start to see, well, these studies have low level of evidence or moderate level of evidence. Very rarely in the practical strength training studies do they show high levels of supporting evidence for a particular modality.
But it would be cool.
I think especially with squats, right?
Yeah.
That's why I was going to say leg extension. You're like, okay, knee extension, I can measure hypertrophy and probably have pretty well controlled experiment. But when you throw a squat in there, you're adding so many extra variables, and you have a research assistant who might not even work out running the protocol.
That's what was it. Ben House and Ryan. Anyways, they said like whatever. Like maybe we can offer solutions. Maybe they should film it. Like film it and put that out, because then at least then you can make an observation.
Yeah.
Because like at the end of the day, we're gonna all say observational data is whatever, but like it is helpful when we actually put it into the real world. And so I think those observations could be used to kind of criticize these studies. Because right now, like we can't say shit. We can say it's poorly done, but we don't actually know. And then everyone else is going to combat it by saying, you don't actually know. And it's like, well, fuck. I don't, but like it could be possible. And I think that's the distinct nature of this thing is like, it could be possible. So then when we're fighting on these arguments, it's like everyone's wrong and everyone's right. So it's nothing gets done. I don't know.
I think that's why you just have to look at all the research. You can't just look at the area that supports your side.
Christian, any thoughts?
I need to fix my slice, man. That's my thought right now.
Your what? Your slice?
Slice.
Oh, your slice. So
hung up on the golf swing.
Before we got the podcast, Christian was like, the bird in the background, and he had his fucking golf simulator on, and I guess we're.
So let's talk about the squat then, right? Because we've now talked about the research, we've talked about the haters.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to go, and I think that we'll start with Joel, because I think Joel opened up the can of worms that was really pissing everyone off. You basically called up powerlifters, Olympic CrossFitters without saying that you even gave a shit about all that, and you somehow pissed off everyone. So and that's the truth. Like I don't think I've seen anyone get so mad at something since like Westside high squats. And like Dave Hoff's 3,000 total. Like it's kind of like the same thing. It's like they did something cool and they put out all the stuff and then everyone got mad. So I guess what's your take on, I don't even know, how would you structure it so that it can be productive?
Well, I think first let's I'm assuming everyone that jumps in here is going to at least have some background of what fired everyone up. But let's just talk about the base, and obviously not too much detail here, but your base theory on what you believe is the optimal squat and why you believe that. Maybe not all 800 points from the article, but just abridged version. And from there, we'll just kind of talk about it from that point.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So, it's definitely a topic that for whatever reason seems to spark a lot of rage. I think for me, one of the things I always like to preface with the squat is that, and I think Christian kind of discussed this already in the video that he posted, which I think even maybe taking a simple step back, and this is already addressed briefly, but one of the reasons why we're having this podcast is because, so this all kind of started with me putting up the article and the video about the squat and generate all this controversy. Christian posted a very well done kind of counter argument, but it wasn't necessarily like even argument. He was kind of saying, hey, here's why he believes some of it and why he has different beliefs as well. So, and we had this conversation because I basically posted on my page how I really liked his way of analyzing it and showing his points and kind of comparing the two. So it shows that you can have a good debate about this in an intellectual fashion. But I always like to preface the squat thing. You have basically three categories that I think for in terms of squat goals. One is you have powerlifting, okay, pretty self-explanatory. You have certain regulations. You have regulation depth. You either get the green lights or you get the red lights. Pretty simple. You got to go to the proper depth, and it's different for every powerlifting organization. You have Olympic lifting. There's no mandate in terms of how deep you have to go, but the deeper you go, typically the more weight you can get, because you're able to pull under the bar and get lower, handle more weight, get a better PR. And then the third category is one that I just like to group in, functional performance. That can include everything from athletic performance to, general populations in terms of optimizing joint health. I think, I suppose we could throw in a fourth one there, people saying, hey, what about the bodybuilding or, maximizing hypertrophy? In my opinion, I tend to find that the last two categories, the functional and the bodybuilding or hypertrophy, kind of merge together. I think this is maybe where Christian and I have a little bit different theories on that, but this is, I think, going to be a great talking point. But essentially, I have found, and from my training, but from the research and from foundational elements of kinesiology, biomechanics, neurophysiology, structural physiology, that if you look closely at things, that 90 degrees is kind of that sweet spot. If we look at, anatomical levers, where do we have the best leverage as human beings when it comes to biomechanics of the joints? It's usually around 90 degrees. If we look at the length-tension relationship of muscles, which basically describes, hey, muscles have a certain amount of overlap, and when they contract and lengthen and shorten, they go through the sequence, the excitation, contraction, coupling process. Well, muscles don't like to be too overly lengthened. They don't like to be too overly shortened. Otherwise, they lose out on their force producing and force absorption capabilities. And even from a cross bridge standpoint, we want the most or maximal cross bridges, which is going to kind of dictate how much muscle recruitment or muscle activation we have. And then, we can even look at things like elastic energy or a rate of deformation of different types of tissues. And we look at the muscle specifically. Most biomechanists will say, hey, we want the stiffest usable condition. And then we can even look at more complex things like passive insufficiency and active insufficiency. When the muscle is too short and it stops producing optimal force and whatnot. So if you look at all these different areas, it's pretty tough to refute the idea that 90 degrees is not optimal. Again, you can, but it's tough to kind of look at these foundational elements that a lot of the researchers will agree on and say, hey, this is kind of that mid-range, moderately stretched / resting length of the muscles. This seems to be where we get kind of a lot of the benefits. And basically what I found is not only is that the strongest position in the most biomechanically sound position, but I found that it's the safest position on the joints, the position that people who normally have a lot of pain when they do movements, have a lot of pain when they squat, they're actually able to do the squat without pain. And it's a very precise boundary as far as what I found. It's kind of, people hate when I go on this, like, oh, it has to be like this. And I don't like coming across as dogmatic like that, but it's just from what I found with the research and what I found with my own practical application, it is a pretty precise boundary in terms of at least what I've seen.
Christian.
Yes. I'll do a really bad job at being the devil's advocate, because I actually agree on most of what Joel said, right? And to me, you really need to look at an exercise for the purpose you're using it for. And I'm gonna go back to the haters again, because you need to be objective about this. Okay, if you look, okay, you might hate Joel for posting that 90-degree squat or superior, but will you hate on 90% of the world-class shot putters? Because most of them use half squats. I mean, they will half squat humongous amount of weights. Will you hate on most sprinters? You look at Ben Johnson, he used half squats. Most elite sprinters, they don't go full range. They might go a bit lower than 90 degrees, but they don't go full range, go down full range. Will you hate on the Westside guys? who use mostly higher like boxes when training, they don't deadlift from the floor most of the year. Only for the last 3 weeks, they want to go to the floor. Because if you're going to hate someone for recommending partial ranges, you must hate everybody who uses the same ranges. Will you also hate those who say, just like me, that the Romanian deadlift is a superior exercise to the deadlift from the floor when it comes to building muscle and building the posterior chain? Because it's the same thing. Romanian deadlift, it's essentially a partial range of motion deadlift, okay? And it loads the muscle differently, okay? So you need first to like look at yourself and what is the root of your belief, and look at everybody else, what they're doing in the world. Like if you're having a lot of success as an athlete, as a strength and speed athlete, then you might be doing something right. Would you be better off doing full squat? Maybe, I don't know. You look at Olympic weightlifters, we like to say that they squat ass to grass. Not all of them. Not all of them. Like look at Ilya Ilin, probably the best clean and jerker in the world. He barely goes to parallel when he squats. He used to squat full, but he said that he found that when he was cutting his depth short a little bit, that's when his recovery from the clean actually got better. Okay, so you need to look at what you need an exercise for. For example, when I work with bobsleigh athletes, for example, or football players who need to sprint fast, like for a good part of the year, we will use partial range of motion to amplify loading in the range of motion that they will need to use in their sport. Now, if I want to maximize overall muscle growth in as fewer movements as possible, now the full squat becomes a great option because there will be slightly more glute activation. The quadriceps activation, the hamstrings activation between full and partial squat, it's the same thing, right? So if I'm gonna be like squatting, half squat, like 90 degrees of full squat, I will get the same quadriceps and hamstrings hypertrophy. In fact, I would argue that depending on your levers, you might actually get better quadriceps stimulation from partial squats. And me, I know for a fact that I have short legs, I actually get a better hamstrings recruitment from partial squats. But if I were to shoot for, I want maximum whole lower body hypertrophy, I would argue that a full squat is slightly better because you're gonna have a bit more glute activation and probably a bit more calves activation. Now, well, you know what? I have plenty of glutes exercise in my program. Well, maybe you don't need to go full. Personally, I'm all about training economy. I want to use the fewest number of exercises as possible to accomplish the goal. So if I'm working with an athlete who's also sprinting, or a CrossFit athlete who needs to do their WODs, for example, I want to minimize the amount of strength training volume. So in that case, I might opt for a full squat so I can actually get rid of a direct glutes exercise. So that's my choice. I shoot for training economy so I can spend more volume elsewhere. But if you can tolerate more volume, if you prefer to have more exercises, I see no reason not to use 90-degree squat as long as you have some exercises to fill the void. But one thing I would say though is I would still prefer is if someone keeps like training movements to access that full range of motion. That might be just squatting in your warm-ups, slow eccentrics with a full range movement just to prepare you for the heavier work. And once you get to the heavier work, then you might go to 90 degrees or parallel. But at least I think you should still train the body to access the full range of motion.
Well, I think that brings up a good point here that is kind of what we're trying to get across with this whole podcast is to, in this whole argument or discussion, is really thinking about critical thinking. And I think you guys both bring up good points here in that in solely being very myopic and focusing on just this half squat, 90-degree squat, just that aspect, people are losing the totality of training. And there's even if they disagree with it being the optimal squat or whatever, it could in the totality of training be the better choice just for the systemic load or the recovery or like you said, when LeBron James squatted high, everyone's like, oh, if I was a strength coach, you'd be so much better. And it's like, really? is it worth it to make him a better squat lower to be better than the best basketball player alive?
Well, and the weird thing is so like on my end of the fence, it's like I look at this as, like you said, a training economy. And I think that when even Joel talks about this, everyone assuming you're not training the other end of things. So like I go from like a respiration model, so to speak, internal rotation, external rotation, pronation, but can you get to that bottom position would be that late propulsion aspect of it. And we know, like, unless you stack all the variables against you, like wedges and all this shit and getting your pelvis and thorax aligned, like it becomes really hard to do it with a barbell back squat. And so a lot of the stuff I use trains the other end with a squat pattern, but it's not necessarily a back squat pattern, because there's also the other end where, like we talk about Westside. But what I see with a lot of trainers and what Joel is basically X'd out as a factor is that, and we talked about in the studies, is I think there's a lot of trainers who shouldn't do full squats because like they're not actually doing a full squat. They're doing a hinged RDL with a butt link at the bottom. And so you almost take that out of the equation. And I fall on the fence of like, I don't know if that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't want to call it everyone for not being competent, but I mean, if you take that variable out of it, then we can talk about optimal. And maybe that's where we go, because I want to talk about two things. Is like, how do you, I kind of just threw my opinion out, whatever. But what I want to know is, how do you train the other end? Because that's, I think, the main argument and why people get mad is like, you're not training everything. And Christian kind of had his point, but how do you train the adductors in those positions and stuff if you don't full squat? Like, is it possible? Because by the sounds of it, if everyone took you at face value, you don't train anything but half squats. And I don't think that's true, but like, I kind of want to know where you lie on how do you train those aspects that are probably going to get lost without going to a full range ass to grass squat. Like, what's your method for doing that?
Okay. So, actually, so just to be perfectly transparent here, I would say that 99% of my training now, I do use, the 90-degree squat. Now, I will say this, the argument when I do have people kind of make say, hey, what about this? And it really comes back to what Christian just said, like, hey, at least like, maybe warm it up or do some light ass to grass squats or even some body weight ass to grass squats. If someone was going to do it, or if I was ever going to do it, to me, that would be the most logical way to do it. It's almost, you could make an argument from that standpoint, like, or at least even in my own thought process, like, how could you argue against that? That's a tough one to argue against. Okay. So I think it's a very good point. For me personally, one of the things that I found with mobility, and this is one of the unique things, and I wrote an article about yoga a few months ago that also got some heat, that I actually don't see, and I haven't seen this with my clients or athletes, and even the research, that to maximize mobility, you don't necessarily need to train with a huge range of motion, because oftentimes training with a huge range of motion and going through these contortionist movements, I'm not calling ass to grass squat contortionistic, but I'm just using the extreme example of yoga, and oftentimes the extreme positions that you'll see these people put themselves through. What ends up happening is they end up wearing down their joints so much, developing so much inflammation, that they basically lose their range of motion. They lose their mobility. So the very thing that they were trying to accomplish from their mobility training is actually the very thing that is compromising their mobility. Whereas when we take a therapeutic modality, say, a lot of people, and I think we could all agree on this, a 90-degree squat, okay, if it's done well, I think a lot of people can handle that pretty well. Okay, I think we would agree on that. So at the end of the day, we could say, okay, it's a fairly therapeutic modality. Okay, so if it's therapeutic, what we find is that, you give the muscles a good stimulus, a therapeutic stimulus. You don't produce too much inflammation. And when I say inflammation, you got the acute effect and you got the chronic, you got the acute in terms of the muscle inflammation response, which is good. It actually helps the hypertrophy stimulus. I'm talking about like stress in the joints that can actually contribute to systemic inflammation, and that when you actually look at some of the research, you actually get an increased level of when they do tests is C-reactive protein, which is basically a measure of inflammation in the body, which is not something that we want. So what I found is that when people do 90-degree positions, they don't get this joint stress. Their joints feel really good. They stop having so much pain. And as a result, their mobility ends up freeing up. And I found this with myself. I got to the point where when I was squatting ass to grass, it would take me 30 minutes to loosen up and to warm up and to stretch and to, get into the movements before I could finally get my full range of motion. Whereas currently when I'm doing 90-degree squats now, I rarely do acid grass, but if I check it or assess it just to see if it's there, it's better, at least in a fairly, light condition, because I'm not going to load it up now. I just don't believe in that personally, but it's there better for me now than it was when I was training it. And I've seen that with other athletes, particularly ones that didn't handle acid grass squats well when they were doing it with that inflammation. Then we get rid of that inflammation and whatnot. So
when it becomes Jeb and I spent a week at Ben House's, but anyways, Eric Helms was there, and a big thing of his thing was like, we can call that logical jumps, because it was like, we studied, because I actually read the ballerina stuff, and it was kind of cool, because like you said, those excessive range of motions, the people who weren't hurt were the ones with tight ankles, like and tighter hips, because they had more strength through the range of motion, and you can talk ever, so you can do whatever. But a lot of this asymmetrical risk is like, that's essentially your argument, is I'm doing this thing because I know I can get the most benefit, and I'm going to use the research to determine what's optimal. I think a lot of the arguments have to do with gatekeeping what optimal is, and you were just offering an opinion. Christian, in terms of, so actually I think the main argument with this whole thing, if someone were to actually take logical steps, and let's say we're going to train half squats, it's going to be the thing we're going to do, like, fuck all of you, I don't care if you hate me. But then on top, and this is where I kind of want Joel and Christian's opinion, because with athletes, optimal isn't always reality. So how do you train them to, I guess, be resilient and like not fragile in unoptimal positions, understanding that may happen? Because I think the main thing is like, well, what if they're caught in a position where it's all fucked up and they're not strong there? And like, I don't have the answer for that, but maybe we'll start with Christian there.
Well, I would answer your question by backtracking a bit about something that Joel said, and it will actually lead to the answer.
Okay.
It's actually a pretty connected topic. First, when we talk about range of motion, we need to understand that oftentimes lack of mobility is absolutely not a problem with mobility. Joel touched about it with the effect of inflammation, but one that is not as well known or well understood is the impact of stability. Okay, oftentimes the incapacity to access a certain range of motion is the body protecting itself against injury by being too unstable. So oftentimes the fact that you are lacking mobility or you can't access a position is because a certain joint or a set of joint is not stable enough. So in that regard, improving active stability by improving your capacity to like stay tight under tension and create that torque will actually make the joint more stable and will give you access to that range of motion. That's something that's really important to understand. So personally, I train that, and that actually like segues into your question. In one element of my training and the training of the athletes I'm working with is literally 1/3 of our squatting volume or regular lifting volume is spent with slow eccentrics, and 1/3 of the volume is spent on isometric actions. I mean, not pure isometrics, but including isometrics within a dynamic contraction. So multi-pauses, pre-fatigue pauses, pauses at the end of a set. We have many different combinations. And the thing is that those two types of contraction actually improves dynamic stability. And that will help you protect you against injuries by allowing that joint to be more stable. But another tool I use quite a bit, and that would be also the answer to how do you train the full range movement, the end range of motion when you only do quarter squats or half squats or parallel squats, it would be loaded stretching, which is a method I use quite a bit of. It's essentially a very slow duration, extreme position eccentric. And I've been doing that for over 20 years. Basically, let's take, for example, a split squat, okay? You would go into the lowest position of a split squat you can handle, probably elevating the front and the back foot so you can have a bit more range of motion, under load, so a dumbbell in each hand. You go to the lowest position you can take, and in that position, you actively try to pull yourself down with gravity. So you're gonna have to use the front hamstrings and glutes to pull you down, and the rear hip flexor and quad to pull you down. So you're essentially training your body to stay rigid and stay contracted and produce force when the muscle reaches the most stretched position they can reach. But since it's an isometric / eccentric action, there's very little risk, there's very little inflammatory response, but you can still train those muscles to stay contracted in that extreme position. Now, when you do that, the athlete will develop the neurological capacity to produce force in those extreme positions. So they don't have to rely on the stretch reflex alone and the tissue to hold things together when you reach those extreme positions in the field of play. So to me, that's how I would like prevent injuries. You do loaded stretching. Actually, you use loaded stretching oftentimes as the warm up of my workouts. The one I really like, because it does the whole body, we will do an overhead split squat. So like a snatch position and gradually trying to get the grip narrower and narrower, and split squat with front and back foot elevated. And the goal is to accumulate 3 minutes under tension total. So 1.5 minutes for each side. And it's really like going that low position and holding as hard as you can. So that will get the shoulder joint prepared. When you hold, you're actively contracting the upper back as hard as humanly possible. And you're trying to pull yourself down with your hamstring, glutes, and hip flexor. So that actually trains that range of motion. So, and then for the main lift, I make sure to include eccentric and isometric focuses to improve dynamic stability.
You know, it's kind of cool with all that, like not athlete talk, but when I came across one of my friends, Carson Calhoun. He's like an Instagram influencer, yoga dude, but he like hates, I don't want to say he hates yoga. I don't put things on him, but he hates the way yoga is done, kind of like how Joel was alluding to in his article. And his solution was he basically adopted a thing called rocket yoga, which is just like partial range of motion and range strength stuff to actually be able to have an active, strong position through these range of motions. And he ends up getting way more results, especially with guys, because they're actually strong in the positions as opposed to using unnecessary end range stuff, which we could compare to Ash the Grass to half range of motion stuff. And it's just kind of cool because other people are doing it. And I would say that there's kind of hate on him in that world too. So it's just interesting to see the dynamics.
I think most of the hate come from the insecurities of having your own certainty being challenged. People don't like insecurities. Okay, they don't like to, okay, what I'm doing, is it like really going to be effective? They like those certainties. I mean, you have to do full squats. You have to deadlift from the floor, which I don't. And you hang on to these certain things that if I do those things, I can do no wrong. And it secures it, makes you feel good about your training. So when somebody challenges it, and more importantly, if they challenge it with pretty good arguments, it creates that insecurity, and you actually have a protective response. It's like with any topic. I know you don't want to talk about politics or religion. I mean, if you want haters, I mean, let's
no religion.
But anything, if somebody like they challenge your belief and actually present a decent argument, it's going to piss you off. It's going to create that stress response because your deep-rooted belief or challenge, and it makes you insecure, and you go to war to defend them. So you lose objectivity because of the stress response.
I forget where I guess, because Joel, how much do you got? Like 10 more minutes left?
Actually, I got a little bit longer.
Okay, actually, what were you gonna say?
I wanted to dive once again into so we kind of have meandered around it, but we talked a little bit about how like Westside and how Dean was saying it's almost a hinge, and they're losing on that and training the other range. But I wanted to bring up, because I saw like your Instagram post today. You had the football player doing the dumbbell like curl position squat, and to me that looked like a really squatty squat. You know, in the kind of respiration world. To me, that didn't look at all like a hinge, which I think is the argument that people make when you show the 90-degree, because they feel like, oh, the upright tibia, the backwards angle, it behaves like a hinge in that. But I look at that and I see that post she's had today, and that looked similar to what we might use for, you know, a Zercher squat or something that we're really trying to get that stacked rib cage and pelvis. So to me, there seems to be more crossover that people just aren't willing to see.
Well, and the one thing I wanted, and maybe Joel can say to this, is like, you basically stop at the point where people fuck it up. Like even if we look at like a hinge initiated squat or whatever, you kind of get to that optimal position, and then it just like, we don't know what's going to happen because like 100 different lifters are going to look 100 different ways. And I would say a lot of them don't have the range of motion, and they just fucking find a different way to do it, a different strategy to do it. And I think that's the argument, is like, well, you can do it. It's like, yeah, you can, but is that optimal? It's kind of your argument. But like with Christian's, like I've seen Christian post his dudes on his Instagram, and they can do a squatty squat, but again, are they the norm? And it's kind of like everyone argues this point, but they don't look at it logically. And you almost stop things when it gets to shit is the best way to put that. So I don't know what your thoughts are on.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's, I mean, I think at some point, I actually had a discussion yesterday with, I think Vince McConnell was on your guys' show, right?
Like last week with our other on the Fitness Devil, but yeah, we had Vince on.
Yeah. But we were having this discussion about, it's basically like, okay, it comes down to like, are you trying to train for how much, what can you tolerate, or what will benefit you the most? So to me, that's kind of one of the things there. But yeah, no, I think, you know, with the 90-degree position thing, and, you know, people look at it and being like, oh, it's not a squat, it's more of a hinge. Well, one of the things that I always show with some of the illustrations is that, okay, there's a 90-degree, there's actually a double 90-degree joint angle. If you do the type of squat that I'm talking about, is one at the knee joint and one at the hip joint. So one that ends up happening is you have force distributed across the two big joints of the lower body pretty equally. So they're not overly stressed. You don't have, 110 degrees of the hips and only, 85 at the knee, or vice versa. It's 90 at both. It's one thing I like to refer to as centrated tension, meaning the tension is spread across the involved joints, the involved muscles pretty equally, kind of like a bridge. I mean, you get these engineers that literally spend years trying to figure out how to build bridges so that the tension is distributed across the bridge equally, because if it's not, the bridge may last 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, but if there is a weak point in the bridge, guess what? It eventually starts breaking down. So that's the thing kind of with the squat or with any movement, how long can you do it for before it starts to break down? And actually, an interesting example, the one you saw today, of the squat, the athlete doing that, he's a NFL player. I started working with him, I don't know, about 9 months ago, and he was a ass to grass squatter, fairly ass to grass. I would say he was a deep squatter, not ass to grass, but always had like major knee stuff. And so basically came to me, we, did the whole 90-degree thing, definitely helped resolve probably 90% of his issues. And then, so he went to his team, and they had him start, they want him to go back to kind of the traditional squat, and his knees started flaring back up again, same thing. And he came back to me a few months later, after the season, literally within like the first day or two of just having him going back to the, the 90-degree squat, where if he didn't kind of, mess it up, so to speak, his joints started feeling better again. So again, it's for a lot of these athletes, you don't have hours and hours that you can spend with them either, trying to get them into these extreme positions. It's like, hey, where am I going to get the most benefit without having to, spend hours with them? And a lot of these players and a lot of these athletes, it's tough.
Well, and the one weird thing, and like, this is where like, I don't want to sound like I super like love it, because like whatever, like I kind of have my thing and I love doing it. But with the Westside thing, and you mentioned it in your article, is that like, again, the big argument is like, oh yeah, you're stronger because you're not squatting as low. But like with the old school geared powerlifting is where I kind of grew up in. They have a wider stance, and they're basically training in optimal based on your recommendations, and they're lifting more weight. And then the biggest thing is like, they're like, it'll be, because they do high box squats, they do gear to kind of hold them there. And then parallel looks more parallel because the gear makes it look like that. So they're actually probably squatting above parallel. But the cool thing is like one of the biggest references is like, yeah, it'll be there in the meat. And like, that's kind of the knock from the old school powerlifting to the new school. They're like, yeah, like fuck those guys, they don't squat to depth. But it's kind of hilarious because they're squatting in a way where they've lifted, like the geared powerlifters lift the most weight. And I know that's changing a little bit, but it's kind of cool because they intuitively did that. But they just found optimal by widening their stance, and it looks a little deeper. And then they're just loading it up, and then they're just bouncing out it in the meat because they're like, fuck it. They didn't train it, but it's still kind of there. And it just leads you to think like, are people, when they're training like that, is that where like the optimal argument comes in? Because if they're always training ass to grass and they're doing that bouncing movement, or like I think in your article you called it bouncing up joints and tendons and stuff, like that's kind of where you run into issues. Is kind of, I'm paraphrasing probably horribly, but it's just kind of interesting seeing those other worlds.
No, that's. I mean, that's right on. I mean, that kind of brings up even what we. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I want to let you guys move on with the next topic here. But when we were talking about, how do I train like those end range positions in case someone needs it? Let's say they're on the playing field and they need those extreme positions. I always get asked that, okay, because it's like, well, if you don't include any, deep positions or any end range positions, how do they handle it? Well, first off, what you're doing, if you go under that assumption, what you're essentially saying is that human beings did not have the ability to handle those positions in the first place. The only reason why they would ever have them is because of modern day training. And we know that's not true, because before the modern era of training, people had those positions. They were able to, sports have been going on for decades. So, it's not like, oh, we just started training end range positions last decade, so now athletes are able to handle these extreme positions. No, they've had them. We're not taking it away from them by training 90 degrees. We're simply giving them more stability, and we're probably providing them less of a chance where they're going to be in these compromised positions, because we're increasing motor control, we're increasing joint stability, we're increasing their ability to absorb forces. If you look at something like, valgus collapse, that's always the easiest one to, examine, where the knee caves in. I don't care if the person has spent months and years training to be able to handle a valgus collapse. If they're in a game situation and they get hit from the knee and from the lateral part of the knee and they have major valgus collapse, they're ruining their ACL. They're out. I don't care how well they can tolerate, valgus collapse or extreme positions. It's like, if that happens, they're out. So what's the best chance of avoiding that? The best chance of avoiding that injury is to avoid getting into that valgus collapse in the first place by having your nervous system so in tune that when it does have that incoming force, it's able to resist it. So that's kind of my argument there.
That's a pretty solid. I'm a jiu-jitsu guy. So there's certain, we talk about knee reaping, and there's a reason that that's illegal in IBJJF. And it's like, I've had that tension and just gotten out of it. And it's snap city. I don't care what you train, how much you train. You get enough pressure on that ACL, especially. It's
like modern day AstroTurf and cleats. It's like,
yeah.
How are you gonna out train a fucking like snag in it and a non-con? Like, I guess, I don't know. Mate, Christian, do you have any thoughts on before I move on? Because I got to go on.
Well, just briefly, it's more about what you said earlier about Westside.
Yeah.
And because I was reminded of something that Dave said in a conference. He said, "Well, okay, any of our guys who can like squat 800 the way we squat, you can put 500 and they're gonna like squat ass to grass easily. But take Olympic lifters who can ass to grass 500, none of them can squat 800 like we do." So there's a point, like if you overload the movement pattern with good enough depth, there will be some strength transfer. Don't forget that strength transfer is up to 15, 20 degrees past the angle being trained. Okay. So if you stop at 90 degrees, you're going to have a pretty strong strength carryover up to 110 degrees down. So I
want a fucking citation. I want a citation right now. I want you to pull it up, and I want you to give me all that information in an article right now on my Instagram. That's my
right now.
Right now.
Sorry. I'm going to give you 20. You get 24 hours. Or I'm coming after you.
I would actually love to have Lane on, because I think we could have a cordial conversation. I think there's like this whole thing, and this is kind of where I want to go now. And I think this is a good segue. Christian, that was actually great. You said that, because I think that there's also an element of like, because you get kind of knocked, and Christian, you're the same way in the sense that you'll write something and you'll put them towards your content that funnels them to your page, that shows your products and all that stuff. And it seems like what's lost here is that everyone doesn't realize, like, A, you're giving free content, and yeah, it doesn't have everything, and yeah, it's pointing to your site where you want to make money, but you also have a job in the training industry, and you're trying to make a living to like be in here for a long time. And the free content's part of it, but the free content isn't, like, a lot of people have stuff behind paywalls. They just don't put a lot of Instagram posts so people don't get mad at them. So it's kind of like, I wanted to have a discussion on how do you approach that. And like, I think that you guys are going to do it the way you're going to do it, and you're going to get hate for it. But like, I think that it's nice to talk about it, because I don't think everyone hears that side of it. They just want answers right now, and they want you to fucking give them free advice, and they want you to put your time and effort and not pay for it. So I just want to kind of, like, that's my obviously bias, but what are your thoughts on that? Because I know you guys both do it, and I think that that's okay. It's just that that's never talked about. hopefully, if that makes all sense. And we could even start with Joel, or we can start with Christian.
Well, personally, I never wanted to do it. I mean, I started writing articles just because I like to talk about trading, and I like to believe that people want to hear what I have to say. And it just eventually became a way to make money. But personally, I actually don't handle that side of the thing. My team is like in charge of publicity and stuff like that. Personally, if it were up to me, I'd honestly do everything for free. I mean, I've had people send me a question on Instagram and actually call them up on the phone and just to answer them. But mostly because I type with one finger on my phone, so it would be like way too long to answer the question. But yeah, but I think that, and that's a good point, that if we all have to make a living. It's like people are offended when you try to earn money from your craft. I mean, if you've been in the field for 20, 25 years, and well, you know what, you have a right to earn money from your craft. I mean, and people don't understand that just because you do put out these articles for free, they expect that everything else will be for free. But wait, it's our job. But that having been said, the more I can help people out for free, the more I'll do it. However, the way my brain works is if you ask me to give you something for free, it will piss me off and I won't do it. It actually has to come from me. I mean, I want to help people out naturally, but if they ask too much, it's like they expect me to give everything. That actually is annoying.
Well, and that's one why I wanted to touch on Joel's stuff, because like, again, I'm like a pretty reasonable person, and like I have biases, but I'm kind of like, I like to like hang out with everyone. But like the one main thing that kept popping on Joel's is like, there's like, everyone got mad because they're like, stop referring to your fucking article. And you're like, the articles that I'm referencing are in my fucking article, and you're trying to say it.
There was a lot of citations in that article.
But instead, I just see you like getting like hilariously laughing and just doing copy and paste. And you basically did that, and everyone got mad. So it's kind of, you antagonize them a little bit, and you know it. But I think that I went to your article and read it just because I was like, well, fuck it. I'm not going to go like, I just hate taking people's time when I could just go find the answer. And that's basically what you're saying. And I had this conversation with Krieger on our other podcast, and he's kind of on the same route. It's just like, they put lots of stuff. They have research reviews and all this stuff. Like, you asked me a very specific question on my Instagram that I answer in my articles that lead to my research and lead to my products. I think it's ethical and morally okay to do that and not have to sit on Instagram giving everyone all the goods. Like, I just want to be realistic in that sense. I assume that's where your head's at, but I kind of want to see it because I see you antagonize them. But like, I think that that's okay because like, you have a business and you have a life and like, you're busy. So like, fuck off.
They've all fucking got Google.
Well, and yeah, I don't know. So what are your thoughts on that? I know Christian had a very political answer, but like, I just be interested because you've never talked about it, but I think that it is important part of the whole puzzle that everyone forgets.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. You can usually tell by the first comment when people say something whether they're inflammatory or not. And if I think they are, then I'm gonna just pretty much give them the saying, "Hey, read the article," and they hate that. And my favorite is when they write like this 2-paragraph just diatribe, just hate spewing, and they just want a massive like long response from me and get me engaged. And the last thing they say, "And don't tell me to read the article." And then I just say, read the article, and I just see them at the computer just ripping their hair out and just going nuts. So like you said, I do kind of like antagonizing them when they kind of cross the line. If they didn't cross the line, I like to be cordial and civil about it. But
I agree. Yeah,
I mean, I think sometimes people, like you said, it's just the age of social media. People want that instant access. It's like, give me the answer right now. I don't want to have to click the link. I don't want to have to search through the article. I don't want to have to do anything that would possibly promote your business or your website or give you better numbers. So give me the answer here. It's like, I'm not going to copy and paste the entire article for you to see, what my description is. And like you said, it's like, hey, the articles or the research studies that I reference are in the article. Yes, there's a lot of personal, explanations and things that I have mixed in there. But at least, if you want to know what my kind of personal beliefs are based on the research, well, here it is. So,
well, and it's this whole idea that there's a snapshot of stuff on social media, and you're doing that obviously for your business and for likes and for followers and for points to your website, but your Instagram posts aren't the goods. You know what I mean? And I talked about this with Jeb.
we're not teaching on Instagram.
Yeah, we're friends with Big Ben House and Mike T. Nelson are like two close friends of ours, and they have courses where people pay $800 to do their fucking thing, and they still give out a large part of it, but they didn't explain their whole fucking presentation in their Instagram post. And I don't know, I just hate that, and that's partially why I wanted to get you on here, is because like maybe if people see that side, they just don't automatically jump to it. And I think that there's a lot to gain for some people in the industry for calling out people like that. I think that that's their method. And I also think that that's okay, because they also have a business and it's built on fucking calling people out. And then it's kind of weird because like that's where social media is, but not everyone participates. And like you don't really participate in that shit. You just kind of point them to your website. And I think that gets people more mad. And so I don't think it's always about the information sometimes, and that gets lost. It just is like, well, they assume you're an asshole. And I don't really believe that. Like maybe you are, but I just, and you wrote,
I told Dean, as I said, I was like, okay, everyone's fired up about this article. I'm like, I'm going to go read this article and I'm ready. Like I'm going to read it, and there's gonna be some bullshit in here. And I read through the article and I said, there's not really anything to get all that fired up about. Like nothing's inflammatory. Nothing's indefensible. There's nothing in here that actually, if anyone actually had read the article, they wouldn't be angry.
Well, yeah, I don't know. And that's kind of us defending you. So if you want to hate on us, fucking remember, you can hate Joel for all this stuff.
Right.
Like, I think it's okay for you to have a varying opinion on something and do half squats, and me not do half squats. Like, I guess so. Like, what are your thoughts on all that stuff combined? And maybe we'll end there, and then Christian can have some closing points, because I think Christian experiences the same things. I know that for a fact because we've talked about it.
Yeah, I think I think kind of Christian nailed it early on when he basically said, people get defensive when it's something that maybe contradicts their belief, or that's a decent argument that goes against their personal belief system. Like you were saying early on, it almost produces a form of rage, and you can almost see like insecurity coming through. You can see anger, you can see frustration, you can see rage. So when these guys try and, if you look up my name in YouTube, unfortunately, my own YouTube channel is not the first thing that comes up. It's all these other videos of people hating on me with these. And it cracks me up that people actually will like spend this time like hating on my, my training methods. Like I wouldn't spend this much time on a single person, not even if it was like my lover or my girlfriend. Like, I'm not going to like devote an entire post to them. So it's kind of flattering, that they're so obsessed with my work that they're going to do this, and all these like massive posts about it. So I don't even know like, where to begin with that. It's just not my approach. I can't really get into it. This is one of the reasons why we're having this whole podcast, because Christian did a quick video, just like, hey, here are my thoughts on this. Boom, did it really well. Wasn't angry about it. You could sense, and this is one of the great things I've loved about you, Christian, for years now, since I've been following you for like a decade and a half, is that you don't get defensive. You don't try to get, no, I don't like that. You don't start ripping people apart. You don't start bashing. You basically, hey, here's my beliefs. Here's my opinion. They want to do what they do. Here's my, personal methodology. And I think when people do like that, they actually help their own case much more than if they're just bashing and ripping on someone. It basically exposes that person when they do get angry, and it doesn't help their case at all. So I think the more collected we can be about our discussion, the more kind of in our right mind and think logically and act as civil humans about this, I think we'll be able to have better discussion.
And I guess part of that, and Christian, you can end on this too, it's just like, I think it's okay to have clickbait posts that point people to your life's work. Like, I don't think that makes you a charlatan. You know what I mean? And you interpreting research, let's just say, like, and someone thinks that the way you interpret the research is wrong. It's like, that's okay. Like, does that make you a charlatan? And I just don't think that's the case. Like, you have a job, people pay you money, and you have ebooks and shit on your website. Is like that a bad person? Because Christian, you do the same thing. Like, I don't know if you have clickbait. You're not a clickbait guy, but you do take your shirt off. And so, like, are you an asshole?
I hate taking my shirt off.
But you do it. So it's like you
in a hoodie.
Yeah, but you do it. You did it enough times that you can use it for the rest of your life. And
yeah,
so,
like nobody looks and says like, "Oh, Christian's not jacked." Like everyone knows you're jacked.
Yeah,
I'm a golfer now. I'm not jacked anymore.
You were jacked at one point.
Good enough. Good enough.
But I guess kind of closing, what do you think on it? Because you've been, not that you've been in it longer than Joel, but I think you've been doing this for a long time in terms of like, I remember, was it you with the Anaconda and T Nation? It's like, that's the same shit. It's like you have a video drinking Anaconda and boom.
And I was actually, I got a lot of, actually, that's why Lyle McDonald started hating me.
Really? The Anaconda?
We're actually friends before. I helped him with his training and he helped me with diet for a TV show. I played a male stripper on a Canadian show. And Lyle McDonald helped me diet down, and I helped him with his speed skating training. And we were actually friends. We were like talking a lot. And the Anaconda like protocol, the way they promoted the product, like it was kind of out there. Okay, and they called me a sellout and all that stuff. Anyway, but my point regarding like the whole online haters thing, and that's my conclusion, is that in the history of mankind, nobody has ever successfully changed someone's opinion by calling you names or even debating on social media. That has never been done. That will never be done. There's no point in like literally like losing sleep on going on Facebook and trying to like show that Joel or me are wrong. That will never work because people do not change their opinion on social media. And but also, you need to keep an open mind. I mean, personally, the reason why I don't get offended when people doubt my methods is that actually I'm the person who doubts my own method the most. All the doubts that the haters throw at me, I've had these doubts plague me for 20 years. And that's why actually I've tried so many different things, because I always think there might be a way that's better to do things. And oftentimes what's odd is that I actually go back eventually to what I was doing. It's funny to say that I think that the pinnacle of my teachings was 15 years ago. Like the second book I wrote, Theory and Application of Modern Strength and Power Methods, to me, that's literally the best stuff I've ever wrote. And everything I've did after that was actually a pale version of that. And I actually always go back to that. Of course, some like knowledge is a bit deeper now, but it's always what I go back to. But still, I've tried everything else. I've always challenged myself. So I'm not offended when people challenge my beliefs, because I'm challenging them on a daily basis. But you as a hater, you should actually challenge your own belief. You should do the same thing we do.
Yeah, and when that's where I want, like, this is why I want to do this thing, and it's a good place to end it on, because I think with you two, it's like let's just use Layton for example. I want to bring Layton on at some point, and I want to hear why he thinks the way he does and why he calls people out, because I think like everyone's going to do things differently, career-wise, training-wise, and all these things. And you two had a very similar way of doing things, and I want people that are kind of like coming up in this industry that want to be you guys one day. Hey, how did these guys approach it? And maybe they align with that, and then they start to do it that way. But that conversation never gets had, because they only see the Instagram and they see the negative, and they don't like see you as real people, so to speak, and like, hey, this is what I did and this is why I did it, and you can do it too. And I think that a lot of that gets lost because everyone thinks they can't do it if they're not a PhD. They think they can't do it if they haven't written for T Nation for whatever 20 years and traveled on the world. And I think that everyone starts somewhere, and it's again, whatever path you take, like I think that it's going to end up probably with haters anyways, but I think that that's okay. And it's okay to make money from this industry, and it's okay to like fucking go to I think it's okay to go to your article. So I'm open to anyone like who's listening to this. Like, you want to talk about it, like, let's fucking talk about it. Like, but you just better be logical and have like a reason. I don't give a fuck if I don't even like the reason. Like, whatever. I think it's just it's okay to have these conversations, because then we can push it forward. And I think that the more people that have that mindset, we will have more Joels, and probably more half squats maybe, and that's going to piss everyone off. But I think we'll have more people that are going to push boundaries, because if we don't have that, I think then we're done. Like, are we done?
Well, and Dean and I have talked repeatedly. The reason both of us are where we are in what we're doing now is because people came along and shattered our entire belief structure of what we had in terms of nutrition and behavior and strength and conditioning. And we went, fuck, we got to start over thinking. And that's what it leads to. So I think it's, it's the disruptors who actually change things. It's not the dogmatic following.
Yeah. So thank you guys for coming out. Stick around. But yeah, thanks guys.
Really appreciate it.
Sure thing.
Thanks for having me.
That's right. I have wrestled with an alligator. I done tussled with a whale. I done handcuffed lightning, throw thunder in jail.
You can't stop me.
I'm going to win. It ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward.
I just keep getting stronger.
Stronger?
Stronger. Stronger.